Hello, everyone, and welcome to the uh, WUJ webinar number 13, Love Inside Out. Let me start by thanking Natalia Hylemko for putting together the slideshow and artist Oleg Shupliak for granting permission to use his artwork. And to Joseph Cox and Sanctus Media for their technical assistance, and especially to Claire Mouchot for coordinating and organizing the show in the context of this webinar. Let me remind you to please select the language channel that best suits you among the choices today. Unfortunately, it's just Ukrainian and English. This can be done by going to the global icon at the bottom right of your screen, or three dots, and click on and make your language choice. One of our speakers this evening, Yurij Danko, will be speaking in Ukrainian, so please take note. Let me welcome everyone to webinar 13 of this series. My name is Joe Cambray. I'm from the advisory board of WUJ, and I'll be hosting this and likely the next webinar, as our dear Catherine Cox needs to step back from this role for the time being to attend to a serious medical crisis in her family. We ask you to hold her and her family in your minds and hearts with love during this time of trial and tribulation for them. She did mention explicitly that, in quote, "You are still very much in my heart, and even if I'm not with you, even if I'm not physically present." Because we have two longer presentations today, there will not be a live Q&A portion. However, please write any questions or comments you may have in an email to wuj@citypsychotherapy.org, and we will make sure they are passed on to the speakers. Claire will put the email in the chat now. Thanks, Claire. For the same reason of maximizing time for the presenters, I will keep my introductory remarks quite brief. That said, I'd like to note that as we move into 2024, the world faces numerous crises and dangers which have been escalating. Worries about erasure of people and cultures is also increasingly a deep concern for all of us. As we come upon the second anniversary of the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine, this blatant aggression is shaping up to be an enormous challenge confronting the democracies of the world. Ukraine is clearly heroically standing at the forefront of this clash. In the US, this past few days, much concern and anxiety has gripped us, as the US Congress has been slow to pass legislation authorizing much needed military support to Ukraine. On Sunday, the US Senate has agreed in principle to fund the war, but it still must go through the House of Representatives. The delay was further exacerbated by the outrageous provocations of Donald Trump regarding NATO allies. We are urging our legislators to recognize the danger and continue the needed support as quickly as possible. Further, we continue to be horrified by reports of the numbers of Ukrainians known to have disappeared in Russian prisons and the many thousands of Ukrainian children who have been abducted by Russia. These are very painful realities to confront. They are further war crimes aimed at erasure. Let us hold up a light to these terrible transgressions and discover where love in a time of war and destruction can be found. Today's speakers will take us on some deeply meaningful journeys into this subject. Katerina Sarafidou, with her expert knowledge of Jung's red and black books, will help us appreciate the importance of love in Jung's struggle during his dark night of the soul. Yurij Danko will start us off with his experiences of sustaining love of Kiev, with its rich history during this time of crisis of invasion. To introduce them, I would like to tell you a bit about our chair today, a friend and colleague, Professor Heyong Shen of China, who pre-recorded his message as it's now 2 a.m. in Macau, and he can't be with us live. You can read about a few of his academic achievements in the flyer for today, and he's also translated and helped to organize translations of many key Jungian texts into Chinese, including the Red Book. Jung has been a central figure in bringing analytical psychology to China and building relations with the international community and Chinese culture. I first met him in San Francisco at the Jung Institute in the late 1990s, where I was deeply touched by his warmth, intelligence, integrity, and commitment to bringing analytical psychology to China. He then became the first Jungian analyst in China, and about that time, I became a member of the IAP Executive Committee. So we worked together on numerous conferences in China over the past 20 some years, building bridges between various communities. I was deeply impressed by his applying analytical psychology to situations of social crises, as, for example, in 2008, following the devastating earthquake in Sichuan. There, he and his wife Gao Lan assembled teams of graduate students for relief work and worked with the survivors, learning their specific myths and rituals before intervening, using this knowledge to help them deal with death and destruction at individual, familial, and community levels. He then went on to work with orphanages around the country through an organization they founded, the Garden of Heart and Soul. These efforts have won him international recognition for his humanitarian work, but more deeply reveal his true commitment to opening the heart with loving kindness as a key to psychosocial transformation. It's my honor and privilege to salute him and turn over the webinar to him. Thank you.
Many thanks, Joe. It's my honor to participate in WUG webinars as guest chair to be with our speakers today, Yurij, Danko, and Katerina Sarafidou. This webinar will focus on love. Love is the greatest, the most inspiring and healing force in the world, capable of creating miracles and resolving conflicts and transforming destiny. Katerina will bring the deep meaning of love from Jung's Red Book and Black Books. The symbol for love in Chinese carries 5 elements. First, sincerity, the image related to the Zhong hexagram of the I Ching, the inner truth. Second, protection, the image related to the primary container, the Great Mother. The third, hands on hands, friendship and support. The fourth one is the heart. The right heart is the core. This is China. I wrote this character for love. There are 5 elements. The 5th element, love is the totality of all of these elements. This 5th element of love is emerging from the heart. I give several elements like East and West on the table lectures, as well as field lecture with the same theme, psychology of the heart and the heart of Jungian analysis. Jung went into depth spirit, recorded in the Red Book and Black Books. He tried to find the knowledge of the heart and the method to work with the heart. He named this new method as China method, related to the wisdom of I Ching. On February 25th to 22nd, the IAP made a statement on its website. I wrote a letter to Meseberg in my capacity of president of the China Society for Analytical Psychology, expressing our support and our decision to participate in the action. Yurij Danko will bring his experience from Ukraine since the invasion and will also share his love for the city of Gifu. He grew up there from the age of 12. He is now the vice president of Ukraine Association for Analytical Psychology. I hope I can be a volunteer in Ukraine with our colleagues. There is an old Chinese saying from the Chinese classics of poetry, who is said there is no clothing, we share the same battle robe. At the IAP Vienna Conference, August 19th, Dovola said in her IAP honored member speech, the shadows are never so close to us today. I visited her in Jerusalem and brought a model of the cauldron to her. Cauldron is the name for the hexagram 50 of the Jing. According to legend, the great Yu melted weapon to create the 9 cauldrons used for sacrifice and nourishment. The ruler was deeply touched by this symbol. He said to me, He, it's a similar idea of Jewish faith to turn sword into plowshares, turn spears into scissors. Last December, we had the 10th International Conference for Analytical Psychology and Chinese Culture. One of the main themes of the conference was the return of Rainmaker, related to heartfelt influence and transformation. We chose the place where Richard Orham visited the Rainmaker as the venue for the conference. As we know, Jung took this Rainmaker story as the most illuminating for active imagination. Both Katerina and I, we talked about the 3 years COVID-19, the situation in Ukraine and Russia, and the punched and scorched heartland in need of hot rain. There is a saying, rain is heaven's tears from the heart of heaven, as well as mercy upon mankind. Just a day after the conference, there started to rain and soon turned into big snow. Return of the Rainmaker, and we are, all of the participants are rainmakers. As Jung said in the Red Book, but how can I attain the knowledge of the heart? You can attain this knowledge only by living your life to the full. In his later years, Jung frequently considered the dangers to the world. As he said, the world hangs by a thin thread, and that thread is the human soul. The human soul is related to human heart. How the human heart is, the world will be. The human heart is relevant to each of us. It is the heart of every individual. We each have a responsibility. This is also the reason and the significance for all of us to participate in WOG. This should also be the message conveyed by WOG. Thank you for your attention and participation. Let's take 1 minute for silence, remembering the soldiers and the civilians fallen in all Ukraine and in all wars. Let's pray for peace. Pray for the return of human kindness and humanity. Allow me to introduce our 2 speakers today. Yurij Danko, born in North Russia, but was been living in Ukraine since the age of 12. He graduated from Kyiv National Shevchenko University and became professor of cybernetics in 1980. In the 1990s, Yurij joined the Ukraine Analytical Psychology Group and became an individual member of IAP in 2016. Yurij is one of the co-founders of the Ukraine Jung Association and currently serves as the vice president of the newly established Ukrainian Association for Analytical Psychology. Katerina Sarafidou is honorary member of the British Jungian Analytical Association and is currently engaged in academic research on Jungian theory and German aesthetics at the Warburg Institute. She is the former director of Jungian Studies and Birkbeck College. Katerina is one of the founders of the Circle for Analytical Association, an organization that provides a 2-year study course on Jung's Red Book. Additionally, Katerina leads a reading group at the British Psychotherapy Foundation, focusing on a systematic exploration of Jung's major works, especially Jung's Red Book and Black Books. Please join me. Let's applaud and welcome our speaker.
Добрий день, шановні колеги.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues.
Вітаю вас
Thank
і
you
дякую
all.
всім вам за участь у нашому.
Thank you for taking part in this webinar. It is a great honor for me to address you and speak on behalf of Ukrainians and my Ukrainian colleagues. I would
Sorry,
like
can
to
I
share.
can I interrupt 1 second? Yuri, you are not full screen. If you want to put the full screen of your slide.
What about now?
Yes.
So, I would like to share my feelings and reflections about Kyiv, the city where I have lived and worked for many years, as well as my and my clients' experiences of the war. I also would like to touch upon the theme of symbols of the city and the theme of destruction of the Ukrainian culture by Russia, both in previous history and now during the war. First, let's watch this video, which I found in the process of preparing the presentation. Let me start it.
Шла дівчина лучками, 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 несла фарту з грушками, з грушками, з грушками, з грушками. Здибав її парубок, 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 дай дівчино заробок, 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 заробок. Кого люблю трушечку, 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 тому дам я грушечку, 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 грушечку. Кого люблю сердушком, ти, чия ж ти, чи підеш ти гуляти, 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 не скажу я, чия я, чия я, чия я, чия я дівчина не твоя, 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 не твоя.
Для мене це відео
For me, this video is a declaration of love to Kyiv. The sisters Anna and Angelina Zavalsky, who make up the duo, the Albi sisters, perform the Ukrainian folk love song that is called "A Girl Was Walking Along the Meadows." The girl carries pears in her apron and gives them to those she loves. And to the one she loves the most, she gives the pears along with her heart and her apron. The song is performed by beautiful women from Kyiv against the background of beautiful Kyiv landscapes. It is then replaced by the phrase, "How can I not love you, my Kyiv?" It is from the city's anthem, which is composed by Igor Shamo and based on poems by Dmytro Lutsenko. The girl sings her love along with her love for her city, for its beauty and its ancient culture.
Київ це столиця.
Kyiv is the capital and the heart of Ukraine, and that's why in February 2022, Russians attacked Kyiv so that they could instantly catch it and decide the fate of the war. Now, on the eve of the second anniversary of the full-scale invasion, Ukrainians are remembering those first days. I will also recall a few moments that reflect the mood of those times. Episode 1, the beginning. It was still dark outside when I was woken up by a friend's call. "Wake up, it started," he said. "We are being bombed." It took me a while to realize that the war had come to Kyiv, and our lives had been turned upside down. Although tensions had been rising around Ukraine in recent months and days, it still came as a surprise. For the next few days, my neighbors and I, we hid in a damn unadapted basement of a high-rise building for several hours when intense bombardment began and the house shook with powerful impacts. Thank God the building was not hit. Otherwise, we would have been killed. And everybody was shocked. And I gradually realized that peaceful life was over. And then there was no telling what was going to happen next. Inside of me, I felt angry, but for some reason I was not afraid. Despite this, I tried to continue meeting with clients online. A couple of my patients from Russia were disoriented, and they couldn't believe that their country had attacked Ukraine, where many of them had relatives and friends. Some of them immediately interrupted the analysis. I myself refused to supervise my Russian colleagues because then we lived in completely different worlds. However, it was important to me to stay in touch with my Ukrainian clients. Anxiety was overwhelming for them, but they remained calm. They retained the ability to take care of themselves, of their loved ones, their children, their parents, their pets. Some of them left the day before and heard the news about the attack on the western border already. Others were going to move to safer places in western Ukraine, or they were sending their children there. During these days, a client of mine told me about her dream. She said, I was going somewhere with my friend. There is the sea and the sun. We're lying on the beach. A see-through wave is lapping at the shore. I know that it will cover me and tear everything off me. But it's gonna be all right. It will pass and we will all be saved. Episode 2, Leaving the City. It was becoming difficult to stay in the city. A lot of things were not working. There were lines at the grocery stores and pharmacies. People were stocking up on everything. My friends offered to move to their house near Kyiv. That direction seemed safer. It was farther away from the fighting, although the threat of being surrounded remained, as the enemy was trying to cut the routes to the west and to the south. I packed my things in my backpack, I took my computer, and I asked a friend to pick me up. But it did not work out immediately, and only on the third day did my colleague manage to get to Kyiv through the checkpoints, and she took me to their house. And I stayed there for a month and a half, and I am extremely grateful to my friends for sheltering me. I sat on the basement of the house and I worked with clients online from there. Olga Kasyanenko, my colleague, and we started running support groups for Ukrainians. And one day, I was asked to meet a local woman who was in a bad mental state after her house was shelled. Her husband and an adult son went to the war, and she was left alone. And she had those thoughts about Russian soldiers that they would break into her house. And it seemed like our conversation calmed her down a bit. Every day I would walk around the house or hike up the hill and look toward Kyiv. I could hear artillery cannonade from there. The smoke of a fire was rising behind a nearby hill, and from time to time something would fly overhead. Like most Ukrainians, in any free moment, I monitored war news on the internet. I slept poorly. I felt a lot of tension. Episode 3, The Return. At the end of March, the Russians retreated from the city, and I decided to return. Kyiv looked harsh, like a frontline city. There were checkpoints and anti-tank hedgehogs everywhere, and defensive positions and intersections. Kyiv monuments were covered with sandbags to protect them from shelling. The only patient who remained in Kyiv was happy to meet with me in my office. The metro was partially operational because it was used as a shelter during airstrikes. Once I stayed late in the office, and I was very worried whether I would make it home before the curfew. Episode 4, Autumn and Winter of 2022. The coming winter was probably the most difficult period of survival in the city. After our offensive in the Kherson region, the liberation of Kherson, the only regional center that was occupied in 2022, there was hope that victory was close. Some of the patients decided to return to Kyiv, and we were able to meet in my office. However, in October, Russia started to launch powerful airstrikes on critical infrastructure. There was destruction, electricity, heat, and water supply were cut off. In Kyiv, power outages schedules were established. 4 hours on, 4 hours off. Unfortunately, with the power outage, the internet and mobile phone connection went down. Since the hidden batteries got cold. It got difficult for me to maintain regular online work with my clients. And I tried to move to other places where the outage schedules were different. However, sometimes I had to consult by phone or access the internet via restaurant's Wi-Fi while sitting on a cold terrace. It was a real challenge, my battle with difficult circumstances. My friends ordered a charging station from Europe for me, and it was delivered to me only after a month and a half, but it allowed me to extend the power supply to a router for several hours in my office. Of course, it was very exhausting. It undermined my health. And after the new year of 2023, I was already feeling terribly tired. And I asked myself if I shouldn't acknowledge the reality and cut back some of my sessions. However, in February, it was lighter and the shelling eased. Later, they started canceling the blackouts, and I could I didn't have to run around the city and look for shelter. We survived. And I even went to a Christmas concert in the city center with some of the members of the Dream Group. Where are we now? Another year has passed, and this winter does not bring such physical suffering to Kyiv residents, although the shelling continues. However, many people feel depressed, they feel mentally exhausted, and this is because of the long-lasting war, the loss of health, and the prospects for the future. Our well-being is affected by the disturbing news from the front line about the lack of weapons, the heavy losses, and internal conflicts started amid all of this. We grieve for the great sacrifices that Ukraine has suffered. In the dreams that my clients have been bringing me lately, there are again many plots filled with fears, persecution, fear struggle, and even images of grace, cemeteries, and the dead. Our work allows us to express these feelings, to connect them with personal traumas. I would like to believe that this work is not in vain, both in the personal and collective dimensions, and it creates meaning and adds some perspective. I involuntarily call Jung's words from the Red Book. There is one necessary but hidden and strange work, the most important work that must be done in secret, work for the dead. And I understand them as our ancestors. And I'm moving on to the next part, ancient myths and culture of the city. Kyiv is an ancient city that emerged many centuries ago at the intersection of routes from the north of Europe to the south, along the Dnieper River, and from the east on the path of great migrations of peoples to the west. The city's history is full of myths and legends, and they include the story of the journey of the Apostle Andrew to Scythia, who prophesied that, and I quote, "The grace of God will shine on these mountains, and there will be a great city, and many churches will be built there by God." End of citation. And indeed, for a millennium, Kyiv has been an important center of Christianity and spiritual life. Among the monuments to this, there are St. Sophia of Kyiv, which was built in the 11th century, and the Kyiv-Pechersk Lavra Monastery, which is still a respected center of Orthodox pilgrimage. Another myth is about the founding of Kyiv in the 5th century by the brothers of Kish, Czech, and Huriv. And you can see the memorial to them here in the slide. Then they also had a sister, Lebed. Their names are associated with Kyiv place names, the mountains on the right bank of the Dnipro and the Lebed River. I think that the very number of the founders and the presence of a female anima among them can be linked to the symbolism of the self as seen by Jung in the Ion. Another important symbol is the naming of Kiev as the mother of the Rus cities, based on the sources of ancient chronicles, in particular the tale of bygone years. And I quote, in the year 882, Oleg sat down, reigning in Kiev, and he said, "Let this be the mother of the Rus cities." End of citation. This meant the proclamation of Kiev as the capital or metropolis in Greek. And it also meant the establishment of the supremacy of the Kievan prince over the princes who ruled other Rus cities. It seemed significant from the point of view of symbolism is that although Kiev has a masculine gender from its mythical founder named Ki, calling it mother, we emphasize its connection with the mother archetype, the woman archetype. And there have been many powerful female figures in the history of both Kiev and Ukraine. Princess Olha, Anna Yaroslavna, Queen of France, Roxolana, who was the wife and mother of Turkish sultans, and also the image of Our Lady of Oranta in the St. Sophia Cathedral, the feast of the intercession of the Mother of God as the Day of the Defenders of Ukraine. And now we are inspired by the figures of Ukrainian women who joined the military, giving their lives, sacrificing their lives for the freedom of Ukraine. I would like to quote a client's dream from exactly 2 years before the full-scale invasion in February 2020.
I watch from above, from the arch of friendship of peoples, two ethereal beings of blue and white blue colors. They are fighting with swords. Beneath them, the water swirls as whirlpools, and there is a roar like a thunderstorm. I'm scared. I understand that the world may die of their vibrations. Then I understand that that's a dream and I can do whatever I wish. Then I start singing in a low voice. Suddenly, I find myself over the water. The creatures notice me and they start flickering and they come towards me. I am scared. I'm afraid they will destroy me. But they enter into me and dissolve, and I become large, big. The thought comes to me, it occurs to me that I need to calm the fish and people. And I start singing again. Suddenly, I realize that these are my children. These creatures are my children. They are not dangerous. They are just naughty. I start singing again, but instead of sounds, blue and white light emanates from my mouth. I see eyes of fish from under the water, and now I'm a school of fish. Every fish at a certain time. I'm surprised and wake up. This dream impressed me a lot because based on this powerful energy, it had all the signs of a great dream. And I recalled a similar dream that the client had brought, but now more tragic in the context of the new later period of time. Was that a prophetic dream about the war, though actually the war had been ongoing since 2014? The dreamer had the association of the image of the woman with the figure of motherland, standing on the right bank of the Dnieper River with a sword and shield. And this is the Berahinya, primordial image of goddess protector. And the blue color is the color of her cloak. Part 3, the War for Cultural Heritage. These myths and symbols have been actively used in the Russian-Ukrainian war. The objective of Russian authorities was to prove dominance of Russian culture over the Ukrainian culture, or even to deny existence of an independent Ukrainian culture. The Russian state ideology since the 18th century was the idea of Kiev Rus as the cradle of three fraternal Slavic peoples, Russian, Ukrainian, and Belarusian. This idea makes it possible to prolong the history of their empire centuries in the past, and that justifies moving the capital from Petersburg to Moscow, and also perception of the other nations as little brothers of the Russian Empire. And now Putin says that Russians and Ukrainians are the same people, and Ukraine was invented by Lenin or Austrian headquarters, so Kiev needs to be reconnected to Russia. Symptomatically, starting in 2014, Russian school textbooks have been replacing the name of Kiev Rus with the ancient Russian state, or they exclude references to Kiev and Ukraine altogether. My colleague, Jungian analyst Dmytro Zalesky, in his paper on the War of Symbols, analyzes the impact of the traumatic experience of the war on the evolution of the Ukrainian identity. He describes the ethical and psychological difference between the democratic foundations of the Ukrainian society following the traditions of Zaporizhia Cossacks and the totalitarian hierarchical ones of the Russian society. I quote, "The idea of Ukraine as a separate political community with a simplified but democratic tradition dates back to Cossack times and to the Cossack state. For example, a modern Ukrainian military unit functions largely horizontally. The Russian army, however, is organized in a completely different way. The Bucha tragedy may have taken on such a gigantic scale, in part because Ukrainian snipers had killed a large number of Russian officers. And without officers, the Russian army generally turns into a mob of murderers, rapists, and looters. Hence, the existential nature of the opposition in the current war, because the Russian imperialist ideology demands destruction of Ukraine as a state, its history and culture. Actually, this has been happening throughout the history of relationships between the two peoples. For lack of time, let me just refer you to a publication by journalist Daniela Dolitova on Vikna.tv website of November the 9th, 2022. She shows how Russian authorities, starting in the 17th century, systemically destroyed Ukrainian books and prohibited use of the Ukrainian language. In Soviet times, horrible repressions took place against representatives of the Ukrainian culture and against Ukrainian peasants. In the latest decades of Soviet rule, a lot of Ukrainian cultural figures were accused of being Ukrainian nationalists. They were imprisoned, subject to forced treatment at psychiatric wards. The poet Vasil Stus and others were activists of the dissident movement against political repressions and against attacks on the Ukrainian culture. In this way, they combined the human rights activists and defense and promotion of Ukrainians' national identity. Now, during the full-scale aggression, Russian troops are deliberately destroying numerous cultural heritage sites in Ukraine. In May 2022, Photos went viral that showed the destruction with a Russian bomb of the Memorial Museum of the Ukrainian philosopher Grigory Skovoroda. That happened when we were ready to celebrate the 300th anniversary of his birth. This is not an accident. This is deliberate effort by Russia to destroy everything outstanding, cultural institutions, personalities, and the cultural memory. This is according to the American writer Dave Eggers in his interview to Radio Liberty. Quote, mostly we talk about tanks, guns, or bombs, but we don't know that the first fundamental element of the Russian aggression is wiping out the Ukrainian culture. It is important. It is crucial and fundamental for them to convince the world that Ukraine is not unique. It is not an individual separate culture. Part 4, The Wall of Memory, a story about death and life. James Hillman writes in The City and the Soul, memories of certain dark episodes remind us of mortality, finality of life. This is why cities have cemeteries. This dark side of human life reminds us of the soul. So a city that speaks to and about the soul leaves nothing out. Nothing should be closed off. The city embraces all aspects of the human soul. The Wall of Memory is a piece of monumental art that was supposed to be part of decoration in Baikova Cemetery in Kiev. This is the central necropolis in Kiev, where a lot of prominent Ukrainians are buried, including cultural and research leaders, figures, statesmen, and military officers. The entire history of Ukraine over the past century and even more is represented here. The cemetery has the crematorium in the form of the open flower, and the funeral procession would have to pass along a huge wall of memory, 200 meters long and 4 to 16 meters high, which would have been reflected in the water of an artificial pond. According to researchers, to Oleg Shmirin in his paper, The Wall of Memory, the experience of transpersonal analysis, the design of the wall anticipated the movement along the perimeter of death, where archetypal images change one another. First, as the woman Regina in the form of rays of light that shed light on suffering. The Wall of Memory is the largest work of piece of Ukrainian monumental art. The complex architectural and sculptural composition is dedicated to the eternal theme of life and death. It is full of drama and full of meaningful metaphors and symbols. It was created by the great artists Ada Rybachuk and Volodymyr Melnichenko, who were couple partners in actual life and co-creators, co-authors. And they worked on their work of art for 13 years in the period from 1968 to 1981, having previously studied sacred eschatology, Ukrainian funeral rites, and symbolism. They made these very dynamic images using modern materials and technologies that corresponded to the scope of the idea. The wall is shaped like a ribbon depicting scenes from mythology and world history, from Adam and Eve, Prometheus, Carus, to the events of the Second World War and the post-war era. But at the beginning of 1982, the official commission announced the wall as alien to principles of socialist realism. and the outstanding Ukrainians as Surgeon Amosov and poet Bajan, they tried to rescue the monument. However, upon the order of Kiev authorities in March, they started destructing the monument. Over the course of 3 months, 300 dump trucks of cement mortar were poured onto the almost completed composition. I had the honor of meeting Volodymyr Melnichenko in his studio in May 2019. And he was speaking about how hard it was for them to survive through to go over destruction of the main piece of work. His wife, Ada, had been dead for almost 9 years, but even after her death, he still indicated both names, the names of the both co-authors on the pieces of work that they created. And you can see an example of that behind my back. In May 2019, it was in his presence, they cleared a fragment of the wall. According to him, that fragment shows a woman in 2 images. One is blowing the trumpet and calling to defend her home and native land, and next to her, the same woman draws water of life with her palms. In August 2021, the work on restoration of the wall continued, and then there was unveiling of the composition Berhinia. It is the one on the right. Unfortunately, Volodymyr Melnichenko passed away a year ago at the age of 92. And I hope that the work of his life and the life of Ada Rybachuk will be fully uncovered, and it will inspire us and serve as a reminder of the imperishable values of culture that
І
are
нехай
beyond
переможе
death and
життя
destruction,
і пам'ять.
and let life and memory
Дякую
prevail.
щиро за увагу.
Thank you for your attention.
Передаю слово Катерині Сарафіду.
And now I pass the floor to Katerina Sarafidou.
Thank you very much, Yuri. So, hello everyone. And thank you for being here. I feel that this topic, which is the topic of the webinar, Love Inside Out, is quite peculiar. So I would like to preface this material a bit before I go into it. My name is Katerina Sarafidou. For those who don't know me, I am an honorary member of the British Jungian Analytic Association, and I'm one of 3 founders of the Circle of Analytical Psychology here in London. I have worked on Jung's Red Book material for many years now with my 2 colleagues. I see quite a few of you in this room know us. And I have also given several talks and lectures over the years on the Red Book. Despite all this, speaking about love in the Red Book, in the context of the Red Book, and even more so in the context of the Black Books, tends to fill me with dread and certainly with quite a lot of trepidation. To some extent, I think one is always unqualified to talk about love in any general or objective sense. It tends to always feel rather reductive, if not hubris. At the same time, the context in which we are meeting today and the context in which we are meeting for all of these webinars is in fact experiences that in most cases can be seen as anything but loving. We are meeting in the middle of a devastating conflict and devastated suffering. So again, this choice of topic may come across as rather naive or cacophonous, But I will be talking about love here as something that is profoundly paradoxical and very much rooted, in fact, in the foundations and in the very genesis of Jung's analytical psychology. Towards the end of his life, Jung says that he falters before the task of finding the language which might adequately express the incalculable paradoxes of love. He refers to love as a God who cannot be comprehended and cannot be represented in any way. He also refers to love as a daemon whose range of activity extends from the endless spaces of the heavens to the dark abysses of hell. So love in this conversation today is not an all-pardoning, all-benign, light-filled, virtuous kind of sentiment. It is a paradox. It's a paradox that encompasses both the heaven and the hell of humanity. As human beings, this love is, for Jung, a confession of our subjection, of our imperfection, and our dependence on one another. Crucially, however, it is also a testimony to our moral freedom to choose between truth or error. And because of this, I think it is profoundly significant. So my approach to this topic of love is also quite paradoxical. I approach anything that has to do with love with an attitude of reverence that befits this ungraspable and mysterious God. But equally, I think my approach is very irreverent because I approach it with a very technical eye. And by this, I mean that I want to hone in on a very specific aspect of love that Jung brings up more explicitly and concretely in the Black Book materials. And more implicitly, some of that material he brings in the Red Book. A lot of the material that I will be talking about today, Jung actually decides not to transcribe in the Red Book, and I think that's for a reason. Jung talks about love in the Red Book in many different ways, and I will not be talking to you about all of those ways. I will, as I say, I will refer to a very idiosyncratic form of love that emerges with Jung's analytical psychology, and it starts to take shape specifically around 1914, around the First World War. And it is my view that this new idea shapes his analytical psychology into something that becomes much more than just a psychology for the cure of neurosis. Among other things, it becomes a new ethic. So analytical psychology as a new ethic. I don't suggest that it is an ethic in the sense of a set of formulary rules or standards that we are supposed to follow, but rather that it is an ethic from the point of view of introducing a very different attitude, a new set of values that are based on a very meaningful and on a profound appreciation of the complexity of our humanity, and an appreciation of the need for each of us to find a way to encounter the otherness of the other within us and within our fellow human beings. This attitude, I think, Jung felt was key for shepherding us through to the new aeon. So this is the baseline of this presentation. I only have 45 minutes to talk to you about all this. as part of this webinar. So it will be a limited exposition, but the full version is also being published. And if you want to talk about this, you can also contact me afterwards in the email shared by Joe and Claire. So before I start speaking of the specifics of this love, of this new idea that Jung comes up with in 1914, I think I need to start by giving a bit of context as to how this need for a new ethic arises and why that is the case. So when Jung starts transcribing his diary entries from the Black Books into the Red Book, that starts from the summer of 1914 onwards. So when he starts this transcription of his diaries, he does so in the knowledge of the war that has just been declared. And he also does this with the premonition and anticipation of the thousands and millions of people who were about to die in the war. In May 1914, so right before the First War broke out, Jung writes, "I felt my eye squirm in pain. It moaned and wailed about the burden of the dead that rested on it. It seemed as if it had to carry 1,000 dead. And then," Jung says, "the war broke out. This opened my eyes about what I had experienced before, and also gave me the courage to say all of that which I have written in the earlier part of this book." So the eruption of the war gave a new psychological meaning to all of the fantasies and visions Jung had up until that point. He realized that they had collective significance and that they went far beyond the purely personal circumstances of his own life. A lot is happening across the first two parts of the book, a number of experiences and visions and fantasies and active imaginations. But some of the key experiences that he had up until that point, up until May, involved an initiatory process of a descent into hell, which he describes a place of disorder, chaos, torment, and hopelessness within. And this is where the journey of his individuation, this is where his journey begins. Jung elaborates on this concept of hell and the descent into hell as follows. He says, he explains what hell is. "Hell is when the depths come to you with all that you no longer are or are not yet capable of. Hell is when you can no longer attain what you could attain. Hell is when you must think and feel what you know you do not want. Hell is when you know that your having to is also a wanting to, and that you yourself are responsible for it." So what Jung describes here is not a Christian hell of sorts that resides somewhere out there in a concrete location, but it is a hellish world, underworld, nevertheless, a deep inner conflict in the recesses of the psyche. Following these series of experiences that he has, Jung reaches three fundamental conclusions about the world and the nature of humanity. On the 1st of February, 1914, Jung realizes that conflict, a clash of opposites, discord, unity, belong to the inescapable conditions of life, as he puts it. He says that discord is part of the force of life. Unity, unification, is not permanent, not naturally so, at least. He says that the one who is on both sides of the opposition brings their discord to an end, but by taking this burden away from life, one also takes the force away from life. He says that absolute peace is vegetative. It does not belong to human life. It belongs to the life of divinity. It is inhospitable to human life. Paradoxically, as Jung learns on that day, human beings cannot exist without divisiveness and without disunity. The devil appears and tells Jung, you have to get worked up about something if you want to live. To get tired of this game is to get tired of life. Life, he says, has to do with climbing up and tearing down, with desire, assertion, and doubt, impatient dragging around, hasty desire. It does not have to do with the absolute and the absolute's forbearing patience. Human life is never contented, never unperturbed. We pull everything down and hastily rebuild. We have ambition, greed for fame, lust for action. Our life has the fizz of new thoughts and action. Personal life, so human life, bubbles and foams and stirs up turbulent waves. It consists of seizing and throwing away, ardent wishing, restlessness. The absolute also lives, but that is divine life, that is divinity. It is no life for humans. It is a standstill because it lives interminably slowly and wastes thousands of years. This is a shocking realization for Jung. And the implication of this fact, the implication of this realization is that we have to find a way to confront this discord and to live with this recognition, with this knowledge, with this reality of this unity of discord within us, and to be able to live with this reality rather than project it outwards if we are to avoid collective catastrophes. As he says in the Red Book, people should sacrifice the hero in themselves, but because they do not know this, they kill their courageous brother. This is a comment on the war, on the First War. So what would that mean to confront this discord within us? Jung says that one has to journey to hell, and this means to become hell oneself. And what he says is that this is the only and necessary road to the inner world. It is the ultimate redemptive path of the individual. He says, he who does not want evil will have no chance to save his soul from hell. So long as he remains into the light of the upper world, he will become a shadow of himself, but his soul will languish in the dungeons of the demons. This will act as a counterbalance that will forever constrain him. The inner world will remain unattainable for him. He remains where he was. Indeed, he falls back. So what Jung suggests here is that there is a need for each person to come to grips with all of those aspects of the psyche that have been excluded. Otherwise, they will remain grotesque and sinister. I said he makes three different realization, or he reaches three conclusions. That was the first. The second insight, the second conclusion he reaches is that the path to having this inner experience, as hellish as it may be, the path for having this inner experience of the fullness of the psyche, which is the hell of self-knowledge, really, has been closed off to many of us, if not most of us, through the idea of the Christian God interpreted as absolute goodness. Because he says that the idea of God as absolute goodness means that we only relate to one end of an opposition, and we try to imitate this absolute goodness, and we push the other end of the opposition into the unconscious and into the shadow. And what this means for you is that the shadow image of God is now projected outwards and persecutes the individual through a distorted image of the other. As he says, humanity is split into two apparently irreconcilable halves. And when that happens, so when the individual manages to remain undivided within, to avoid inner conflict and projects the conflict outwards, one does not become conscious of this inner opposite, then the world outside must perforce act out the conflict and be torn into opposing halves. This is how he puts it. This is the plea he makes, referring to the visions he had in his initiatory descent. He says, I want to tell you more about my visions so that you better understand which things the spirit of the depths would like you to see. May those be well who can see these things. Those who cannot must live them as blind fates. So we need to relate not just to the absolute good, but also to the adversary of that. They are both part of the cosmic wholeness and are both indispensable for the recovery of our humanity. And the third realization Jung makes is that the wars that were happening during his lifetime, and particularly he refers quite frequently to the First World War and the Second World War later on, he suggests that these wars are partly at least indicative of the dawning of the new aeon, of the new age, which forces the human psyche to confront this chasm in ourselves and find a solution. So as the new aeon, the new age comes in, it's no longer sufficient for us to aim to be good. We have to aim to become whole. And he felt that the collective catastrophes that were experienced in the two world wars were indicative of this very split. He says, for example, on the 5th of August, 1946, he writes a letter to one of his collaborators, Erich Norman, and this is what he says to him. The situation in Palestine seems to be very difficult indeed. The new age is being born with endless pains. So for Jung, a new ethic is needed that goes beyond the known Christian ethic. A new ethic is needed, a new set of values, a new attitude to help us carry out this new task that the new aeon demands. And this is the ethic of analytical psychology. He says we must regenerate ourselves, but as the creation of a God is a creative act of highest love, he says, the restoration of our human life signifies an act of the below. This is a great and dark mystery. So I will go on a little bit now to sketch out some of the key themes that I want to at least present in the context of the time that I have with you about this new ethic. But what I suggest to you is that what I will describe should be familiar to you as an inherent part of analytical psychology, of the way analytical psychology is practiced and is understood. So he talks about the great and dark mystery, which is the restoration of a human life, and it requires an act of the below. He remains relatively cryptic about what that is, but he elaborates a little bit more in the Black Books. So the way I want to put this is to say that by the time Jung completes the first two parts of the Red Book, so Liber Primus, Liber Secundus, he has already outlined in general terms most of the things that I've just told you. So he's outlined the main things that were missing from the Christian message and what needs to be recovered through the human being. And he associates this task, the task of recovery of what was missed out of the Christian message. He associates this task with the idea of redemption. This is the redemptive task. This is the task of individuation, the task of wholeness rather than just goodness. So he's done all that more or less by the time he completes the first two parts of the Red Book. But really, it is only in the third part of the book, which he calls the Scrutinies, that we really see the full context of Jung's ideas, his full cosmology, and including the new ethic that he comes up with, and most of all, the role of the human being in the cosmos. Because up until that moment, and through the devastation of the war, what Jung experiences is the human being almost as being at the complete mercy of these grand collective processes. We are the plaything of the gods in a way. Jung's eye is in the service of the soul. It is in the service of the gods, but also in the service of the dead, of our ancestors, of those who died incomplete, who did not have the chance to individuate. And because of this, they besiege the living and they ask us to help them. So the question Jung poses at the beginning of the Scrutinies really is, how does the human individual, the human animal, as he puts it, how do we relate to each of those forces in the cosmos? What is the right attitude? What is the right position towards all of them? Do we completely surrender to the shadows of the dead? Should humanity completely go to waste for divinity? These are the questions he asks. And it is for the first time, really, in the Scrutinies, that we see Jung acknowledging in a very moving way, in my mind, the very special value of qualities that are purely human. Particularly, he outlines three qualities. The first quality is compassion. Compassion is an exclusively human quality. The gods have no compassion for the human beings. The soul has no compassion. The dead also have no compassion. It is compassion that we have for our own humanity and for each other, for our other fellow human beings who suffer and have suffered, living and dead. Jung says, I felt my eye squirm in pain. It moaned and wailed about the burden of the dead that rested on it. It seemed as if it had to carry 1,000 dead. Compassion, we learn, binds life and death, and it is a human quality. The second quality, which is human, it is part of our incarnated nature, is differentiated knowledge. The way he puts it is, we need differentiated knowledge to clear up the confusion which the discovery of the soul has brought in. In other words, we have to apply moral agency to differentiate ourselves from archetypal forces that possess us. We are human. We are not gods. This is our fate. And the human being is the only moral agent in the universe. This is our cross. Differentiated knowledge. And then the third quality is love. Again, love is understood in many different ways, and it is also referred to in different ways by Jung himself in the Red Book. But in this particular instance, which I am focusing on, it is a very human quality. An interaction that takes place in that moment with his soul is that his soul, who is not human, who is demonic, is trying to keep this away from him, to conceal it as a gift. Eventually, she gives it up. This is what she says. Alas, I can neither keep it nor conceal it. It is love, warm human love, blood, warm red blood, the holy source of life, the unification of everything separated and longed for. Jung talks about this love as our sacred inheritance. So sacred inheritance in terms of our human sacred inheritance. So it is again referred to here as a particular human quality, which is in some way also cosmogonic. So it is the holy source of life, the unification of everything separated and longed for. So it is quite an idiosyncratic kind of love. Jung does not elaborate on this love directly. He does talk about a little bit about it in the Red Book indirectly. But what I find very interesting is that there are a series of entries in the Black Books which Jung chooses not to transcribe in the Red Book, where he talks about this very notion. The reason he decides not to transcribe those entries in the Red Book are not an accident, in my view. They can't be an accident, and I will explain what I mean by that. I guess I can say now that the most important thing that I think is on his mind is that he does not want to formulate this into a concept, into a theoretical concept. In fact, he says, as I mentioned in the beginning, he says that the very opposite towards the end of his life. In Memories, Dreams, Reflections, he says there is no language that can adequately express the incalculable paradoxes of love. He does not want to formulate this into a sort of theory concept. These entries that I will refer to are from the 9th of March, 1914 to the 16th of April, 1914. I consider them very impactful. As I said, they are long entries. They're not transcribed in the Red Book, and very shortly after that. So there's a couple more entries after that, and then he leaves this experiment. He leaves completely this experiment for over a year. So he doesn't return to the Black Books for over a year. They are significant. Something has happened, I think, in his acceptance of this mystery of love, as he describes it. Some sort of transformation has taken place, in my view, and he's moving in a new phase of solitude. At that time, this is March, April 1914. He also resigns from the IPA, the International Psychoanalytic Association. He also resigns a few days later from the position of lecturer in the medical faculty of the University of Zurich. This formulation, this new insight has both personal implications for Jung, but I think it has profound implications for the development of analytical psychology. So I will try to follow a few themes about this idea of love, which I consider to be a central attitude in analytical psychology, and also I would say as a key ingredient of transformation. The language, obviously, that I'm using, that Jung is using, because that's how he describes it, the language is quite idiosyncratic. But as I said earlier, I suggest that this material is recognizable, I'm hoping, across the spectrum of analytic thought, of analytic work and analytic theory. But they were not published in this way, at least before 2020, which is when the Black Books were published by the Philemon Foundation and by Sonu Shamdasani. So on the 9th of March, Jung finds himself hanging in his active imagination. He says to his soul, I feel as if a chaos is hidden deep inside me. I feel as if I needed some relief. What has happened is that he has been given a crown, a gift from heaven that says love never ends. And he doesn't understand it. He asks he asks his soul to help him. And his soul tells him, don't try to understand love. One has no concept of love, she says. Love is not to be understood. She says, the desire to understand love is already plainly awkward and the source of many evils. One does not understand love. It is not to be understood. One simply has it or not. Jung protests to this. He says, so you think of love as something entirely irrational? She responds, if you absolutely want to put it philosophically, you may call it so. So you may call it irrational. The attempt to understand love, however, at all, is simply bad. So Jung reflects what his soul tells him, and he says, so I have made myself guilty of intellectualism then. I try to reflect and figure out where I have made this error of intellectualism. I don't know where I've made that error. And she says, you've made this in your daily work. You always look for reasons why you give love and why you receive love. That must be avoided. That sounds strange, says Jung. Shouldn't one render at least an account of it? Under no circumstances, she says, you interrupt the process that is vital for you and for the other person. So the first thing we learn about this love is that it is not a concept and it should not be understood. Either one has it or one doesn't. And Jung was guilty of intellectualism, according to his soul. He has a hard time accepting accepting love as something entirely irrational and that one should not even try to render an account of it. But his soul says, under no circumstances should you render an account of it. You will interrupt the process for you and for the others. So that's the first thing we learn. The second characteristic of love, and obviously there's more to say, but I'm just drawing some of the main themes that I consider important. Still on the 9th of March, his soul tells him something very significant about the nature of love. She says that love is the most sensitive organ of perception. She says, only love lets you read your own soul and the souls of others. Nothing else will do. Only love. It will be, it is, and it passes, hiding an infinite meaning in itself. So love not as a light-filled sentiment or emotion, the most sensitive organ of perception. It is a very precise organ of perception. Jung, of course, protests. He says, do you want to ban all my thoughts about it? Why then do we have reason in the first place as human beings? And he so says, reason is valid, but reason comes afterward. Jung doesn't accept this. He says one can hardly accept this proposition when we only introduce reason afterwards. That happens to our detriment. He so says, well, it would be worth a try. So again, now, love is not a sentiment. It is the most sensitive organ of perception through which we can grasp something imperceptible, the soul. The third point, the third quality of this love that I'm sketching out is that it allows sacrifice to happen. One of the most difficult, I think, things for Jung to take in is this, that we have to allow ourselves to be taken in by love. Love is what allows sacrifice to happen. What she says is that it is our nature to be sacrificed for the birth of the new. In other words, if I put it another way, to accept the otherness of the other, to encounter the other, we have to be able to sacrifice the one with which we are identified. And we cannot do this sacrifice without love and without being taken in by love. The soul, in order to explain this, she gives him a story. She says, once upon a time, there was a gardener who sowed flower seeds, but the birds came and ate the seeds. So the gardener built snares and glue traps. When he came back the other day, what did he catch? A bullfinch. And Jung replies, so what's the story? Do you mean me? Am I the bullfinch? And the soul says, yes, who else? The bullfinch has been taken in, not because he has eaten from the seeds, but because it belongs to its essence to be taken in. So it's not something that was done to the bullfinch. It is in our essence to be taken in. It is in the essence of love to be taken in. The way she puts it is libido love is always taken in. So human love is always taken in. Jung protests, naturally. He says that contradicts experience. I cannot accept this. And what she says, interestingly enough, in response, is that you don't need to accept it unconditionally. Truths don't need to be accepted absolutely. So again, this is not a concept that needs to be elevated into this kind of objective theory. It is an experiential truth. This idea of the necessity of a voluntary sacrifice is also seen in the Red Book in different guises, of course. He says, for example, in Liber Primus, no one should or can halt sacrifice. Sacrifice is not destruction. Sacrifice is the foundation stone of what is to come. The next quality of love is that it can be one-sided. And I realize I'm going to have to pick up the pace a bit because I think I have 6 minutes left or 7 minutes left. So I don't want to leave you hanging, but you will be able to read the full exposition. But I will bring this into conclusion. So love can also be one-sided. So the soul implies that Jung should not just give love to others, he needs to allow others to give him love even if he does not return this love in kind. He's referring to patience here. In fact, she says you need to intensify the longing in others. That way they become modest. And Jung has quite a big problem with that. Again, everything that I'm outlining here goes against the accepted ethic of the time. She says to Jung, you ought to demand. And Jung says, so how should I behave to patients in practical terms? Be demanding, she says, and make yourself scarce. Jung asks, that means the greatest possible restraint on my part? The utmost, she replies, but allow the approach. Jung says, I'm finding it difficult, but I shall obey. In Sonu Shamdasani, in a conversation, so he says that from a clinical point of view, this sort of ties into what Jung is actually doing with his patients from his diaries. So he says that Jung allows those massive one-way love relationships, and he's comfortable with discussing them with a patient, without reciprocating and without stopping the analysis. So he's comfortable. So he's becoming comfortable sitting with this one-way relationship. So from a clinical point of view, this would mean a non-interpretation of other people's love, so a non-interpretation of erotic transference. He accepts it, which is a very different thing to do from the psychoanalytic work of his time. The next quality of this love is that it is a love that does not impinge on life. This is quite a brutal entry, so I'm not going to read it from the Black Books, but this is the only one that Jung elaborates in the Red Book quite a lot. And he says that this has to do with, so a love that does not impinge on life has to do with a renunciation of virtue. He says, if I'm now, as I say, I'm abandoning the entry of the Black Books because I consider it a bit too much for the time we have. But he says in the Red Book that if I accept self-forgetting virtue, I make myself the selfish tyrant of the other, and I am thus also forced to surrender myself again in order to make another my master. So self-forgetting virtue, basically, is no virtue at all. Is making myself the selfish tyrant of the other. If someone is asking for one help and advice, then fine. But one should not aim to help and aim to give advice without being asked. He says that is Christian presumptuousness. The gods don't need your help. Are you perfect yourself? Therefore, remain silent, mind your business, and behold your own inadequacy every day. You are most in need of your own help. You should keep your opinions and good advice ready for yourself. You don't need to play God. So again, you should only offer help and advice if this is being asked. He said, is it cruel? Do you think it's cruel to leave your blinded fellow human beings to their own devices? It would be cruel if you could open their eyes, but you could open their eyes only if they solicited your opinion and help. If they do not need your help. So the next quality, and we're getting there, is that love allows for subjective truth, because love relativizes absolutes. It allows for subjective truth, and love is the only thing that by doing this, by relativizing absolutes, it can only reach to the kernel of things. It is the only thing that can reach to the kernel of things, because truth, says the soul, is only subjective. The only truth that matters is subjective. When it becomes objective, it's poisonous. So what we see here as early as 1914 is how subjectivity and the emotional truth, the subjective truth of the individual is elevated as the most important kernel of things. I can't describe how radical this is, how radically different it is from the psychoanalysis of the time. We may take it for granted now, but it was extraordinarily forward-looking. And then, yes, so I need to conclude. So I'll give you the final thing, which is that it is love inside out. This love is love inside out. And what does this mean? Asks Jung. How shall I take this? The soul says there is straightforward love and love inside out. Straightforward love is direct love. So love inside out is indirect love. And what she's referring to is loving someone indirectly is to love their obverse. So the way to love is to love the generosity of the miser, the ugly of the beautiful, the rationality of the crazy, and the badness of the good. What is needed, what we need for ourselves and for the other, is love inside out. And this is what Jung says: I once could love the beauty of the beautiful, the strength of the strong. But now I have to learn to love the beauty of the ugly, the spirit of the foolish, the strength of the weak. This is love inside out, to love something which is abominable. I had to recognize, says Jung, that I must submit to what I fear. Yes, even more, I must love what horrifies me. So if our virtues, he says, hinder us from salvation, we need to discard them, since they have become evil to us. And the slave to virtue finds the way as little as the slave to vices. So I think I will stop here on the point of love inside out. As I said, there's more to discuss on this, but I'm happy to talk about this at another point, and there will also be a more full publication of this. I guess I'll finish by saying that that these are a few themes from the Black Books on a very idiosyncratic idea of love, which I like to think is very recognizable in the way people practice analytical psychology today. But what we don't perhaps appreciate is that they circle back all the way to this extremely pioneering, forward-looking moment in 1914. Also, the final thought is that this has never been raised by Jung as a concept, as a theoretical concept. He says in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, in my medical experience, as well as in my own life, I have again and again been faced with the mystery of love and have never been able to explain what it is. Like Job, I had to lay my hand on my mouth. I have spoken once and I will not answer. Thank you.
Well, thank you to our speakers and to our chair for sharing the results of their hard work and deep reflections inspired by Jung's legacy. Thank you for contributing to the WUJ so generously. Thank you for being inspired by the opportunity to respond to our Ukrainian colleagues and friends who continue to find meaning, to find resilience and love when forces for hatred and destructive omnipotence threaten their lives, their beautiful country and culture. Thanks also goes to our interpreters, the webinar hosts, and to many volunteers who work hard to bring these webinars into existence. And thank you to you, our audience, who by joining in on this webinar give emotional support and recognition to those in the world suffering from the threat of erasure, especially to those in Ukraine. We hear from them how valuable it is to know that others are with you in heart and mind. As well as the webinars, WUJ also raises funds to support colleagues in Ukraine who are suffering from financial hardship. We give thanks to all those who have donated to this fund over the last year. For instance, last December, 8,900 was shared between 39 colleagues, that's pounds sterling. And this January, our funds stand at 6,312. If you would like to donate, you can do so in the following ways. The link to donate can be found on the webinar flyers that you are sent regularly. You can also find it in the chat section on your screen, and you can click on it at the end of the webinar. All our thanks go to those of you who feel inspired and able to contribute in this way. Thank you.
Let me echo words of Judy and how powerful this has been today to be a part of this activity, to share in these reflections on what I would say is sacrifice at an archetypal level, and how that opens us up to something more profound and transformative that does escape any conceptualization. So our thanks to Yurij, Katerina, and Jung for their presentations and to all the support that you and the staff have offered. Our next webinar, the 14th in the series, will be on March 12th. The speakers will be George Hoganson, a Jungian analyst with a keen historical and political sensibility, together with Anna Mitsuk from Ukraine, and chaired by Yurij from Berlin. This will be another powerful set of presentations well worth attending. Following on that, on April 16th, Ursula Wirtz, known to many of you for her work on trauma, will present along with Victoria Demchenko of Ukraine and Eva Pattis of Milan as chair. To end our evening reflections, we'll listen to the prayer for Ukraine by the composer Mykola Lysenko, and wish all of our Ukrainian colleagues to remain safe. Bless.
Боже великий єдиний, нам Україну храни. Єдиний, нам Україна.